Man, welcome to the show. My question to you is that the new administration is there. There's a new person in the Oval Office with the entire new setup, and finally that has happened. Can you help us analyze that? How do you see the future prospects of the relations between Pakistan and US with this new administration?
Well, I think that the Supreme Court's decision to uphold the acquittal of Omar Sheikh and his three co-conspirators, it really comes at the worst possible time for U.S.-Pakistan relations. For Washington, there's a keen desire to partner with Pakistan in some narrowly defined, albeit important areas, particularly working with Pakistan to help move the peace process forward in Afghanistan. But I think that this comes at a particularly bad time for Islamabad, given that the Pakistani government has, on a number of occasions, indicated that it wants to reset the relationship with Washington in the Biden era and try to broaden it and expand it and move it beyond the usual security issues that's marked the relationship in recent years. And of course, this news on the Pearl case is going to make it a bit more difficult for that to happen, for sure. Now, I think that eventually the two sides will move beyond this. There will continue to be a lot of unhappiness in Washington. And I think that the concern is that it will be difficult, at least in the immediate term, for the new administration to pursue its relationship with Pakistan on a rational level, as opposed to in a way that's sort of guided by emotion and things like that. Just because this is, of course, a very significant case that has been something on the minds of U.S. officials from both major parties for many years. But that said, again, I think that we will see the relationship move forward, but I do think that there's a disconnect. The U.S., I think, is not as inclined as Pakistan is to broaden the relationship beyond the areas that the U.S. wants to focus on, which largely entails Afghanistan and counterterrorism. So even before this news on the acquittal, the Supreme Court acquittal of Pearl's killers and abductors, the relationship, I think, was going to be in a bit of a tough place. But I do hope that it's able to move forward, particularly if you could have issues like climate change and public health that the Biden administration is keen to engage on, and that they could find those areas to be new points of cooperation, particularly if they happen outside of official channels. If you have the business communities and the academic communities in both countries working together to push forward cooperation in those areas.
Right. Michael, you spoke about the Daniel case and the Supreme Court statement on the recent development that has happened in the courtroom. There are lots of analysts. There's another school of thought which is coming in this way, and they're saying that, okay, let's put it this way, that this is an internal matter. Pakistan itself is a sovereign country, and whatever is happening here is based on law, and all the legal procedures being followed based on the evidences and the witnesses and whatever is the requirement, right? So can you juxtapose this thing in US, like if any court or Supreme Court of US is saying anything, and any other country or maybe Pakistan comment on that or shows concern on that, you don't think so that this narrative, whoever is saying this, is right, that, okay, this is Pakistan's matter. And if we speak about the matter, the person who's in there, who's accused of this, is already in sentence, is already in the prison from like last 18 years and plus. So the sentence given to him was like 7 years earlier, and he's been here like 18 years. The procedure is going on. It's not, the case is not shut. How do you analyze this narrative?
No, absolutely. I acknowledge that perspective, that indeed this is a Pakistani legal process and a decision that came from the Pakistani courts, for sure. But I think that here in Washington, the response would be twofold. One, this is an American. This is an American journalist, an innocent journalist who was beheaded, executed, decapitated, his body cut into 10 pieces. So, I mean, this is something that clearly is going to be of very direct interest, not just to U.S. policymakers, but to Americans on the whole. And secondly, I mean, as you know, the legal process has been very complicated, and there are clear indications that the prosecution had a very weak case when the trial happened in 2002, and Omar Sheikh was convicted to death. There's a very weak case. There was indications based on an investigation that Georgetown University did that the prosecution and prosecution witnesses actually were perjured and they used inaccurate information. And so basically, Omar Sheikh was sentenced to death for the abduction of Daniel Pearl, even though there was little evidence that he actually was involved in the killing. He was involved in the abduction. So basically, it's ironic that there's indications that Pakistan wanted to move the legal process forward, wanted to get past an embarrassing thing, and wanted to show that it was tough on terrorism by convicting this guy to death, even though there was a very weak case. So for the U.S., the point now is that, okay, you had a very troubled, weak case back in 2002, in which this guy was sentenced to death, whereas in fact. But is it really right? Is it really moral that someone should be acquitted when he served out his sentence, even for an abduction case, a case of kidnapping, given what this entailed? I mean, there is a lot of evidence that Omar Sheikh was the mastermind of the kidnapping, which led to this brutal execution. And of course, this is someone that has been involved in other brutal activities even before the Pearl case. So bottom line is, for the U.S., we're talking about an American citizen here who was executed.
Right, okay.
And we're talking about indications of a case.
Let's move ahead. I mean, this is one side of the story, and we're going to keep this, on the other side. Let's move ahead. Daniel Pearl, his murder is something which we all condemn. This should have never happened, and that was a brutal murder. But on the other side, Pakistan itself, you've reported a lot about it, you've written a lot about it. Pakistan is an ally to US after this all has happened in 2001, whatever happened in New York. So there's lots of things that Pakistan has done with US as well. You don't think so that this new administration, this is the first formal official interaction they started off, and that they started off with this Daniel Pearl case? You don't think so that whatever was here in Pakistan's side, they were optimistic with this new administration, the same should have been there on the other side, because, being friends is better than, being tough?
Well, I think it's encouraging that the U.S. government messaging toward Pakistan about the Pearl case, it did acknowledge that Pakistani courts have filed appeals, not just in terms of this last decision of the Supreme Court, but when the High Court in Sindh had called for Sheikh's acquittal, the government officials had launched appeals there. And I think it's important that the U.S. government has acknowledged that. And that suggests that there is a willingness to sort of move past this and understand that, the courts do their own thing in Pakistan. And, the U.S. has to sort of overlook that and get around that in order to get back to pursuing its relationship with Pakistan, which, as I said before, it'll be fine. I mean, it's going to take a few more days to get past the sting of the news, for sure, for the U.S. government. But eventually, the two sides will be able to move forward, albeit with that disconnect that I mentioned earlier, where I think Pakistan wants to broaden the relationship in ways that the U.S. is not yet ready to.
Right. Thank you so much. We had Mr. Michael Kugelman with us. Thank you for your time.